I think as I get older, though, I feel really different than I used to. Like, I
Yeah.
just don't feel like I have the highs and the low lows the way
Hmm.
I used to, or the volatility. I don't know.
Yeah.
I used to have that sort of circular, fixated type thinking when I was upset with somebody or
Hmm.
some situation happened, and I could ruminate on it. It was almost like my drug.
Uh-huh.
I could ruminate on it. You could go talk to your friends, phone everybody, tell
Yeah.
everybody about it. Um, and I think at some point I just got tired. I just
Yeah.
got tired of doing that and realized there's no point. It's not helping me. It's not making me feel any different. And one thing, I mean, this is maybe a little off topic, but I guess it was probably about 5 years ago. I had a bit of a cancer scare.
Oh.
And so there's a period of time in there where you're waiting for the doctor to give you any sort of results. You don't really know.
Hmm.
um, I'm the kind of person who probably goes down every dark and twisty pathway of what that could look like,
Yep.
where Trevor would just not want to talk about it at all because in his mind there is nothing to talk about. We
Yeah.
haven't heard anything. We don't
Yeah.
know anything. So he's not gonna, which is very infuriating, by the way, when
Oh.
you want to like get into it and you want to like plan your funeral and
Uh-huh.
somebody else is like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And it's like, what are you talking about? This isn't about you.
Yeah, it's
This
all
is
about
about me.
me. Like,
you know
wake up.
but because I didn't have that outlet and I wasn't sharing, even some of our kids didn't know at that time because of just the timing of it and their age and things like that. Um, I did find that I had to really figure out how to manage those emotions alone.
Hmm.
And I'm really grateful for the skill now,
Yeah.
but it was hard to learn. And what it ended up being was certainly going for walks because it sounds so trivial, but I just needed to get out of the place where my feelings and thoughts would ruminate, which was at home,
Yeah.
and get outside, look at something else. But I really started to just take the deep breaths in and then out, like in through the nose, out through the mouth as I was walking.
Yeah.
But what I ended up imagining was every breath of like medicine air would go in,
Hmm.
and when I exhaled, it would be any poisonness in me,
Yeah.
right? And it was just like
Yeah.
visual, and but it's what kept me from um having those really dark thoughts and
Hmm.
spiraling. And it's something I do now. If I start to feel anxious or overwhelmed, or anxiety is sort of, or panic is starting to creep up, or the circular thinking, it's
Yeah.
something I will sort of instinctively now remember to just take
Hmm.
that breath in, let it out, feel the for lack of a better term, like cancer cells exiting my body. And I
Yeah.
remember talking to an First Nation elder about this once, and she said, "Oh, what did you do with that negative air?"
Hmm.
And I'm like, breathed it out. I don't
Yeah.
know, like. And she says, "Well, did you put a offering or pray over that? Because you're putting that negative."
Yeah.
Poisonous air out, it's also landing somewhere. So she also taught me that it was my responsibility to make sure that was not landing on
Hmm.
somebody else in a negative way. It sounds a little weird if you don't, and I'm just learning some of that
Yeah.
stuff, but it was a good way to almost be mindful of it, and a good way to take responsibility for the types of feelings we have and what we're going to do with them. And that
Yeah.
was even in more of a tactile way or a visceral way,
Hmm.
that exercise really showed me that.
Yeah, like myself, not that, I mean, it wasn't me, it was my kids, but like when we were getting ready to find out about Lincoln, um, it actually took like a year and a half for us to find out what was wrong with
Mm,
him. And in that process, just one time I had heard the words ataxia telangiectasia and blew it off. And
mm,
um the one neurologist actually said, "Hey, like I can't help you. I have no idea what's wrong with your kid. I'm going to pass you off to somebody else." And so we got passed off to a different neurologist, and she actually was like on the board in Israel for ataxia telangiectasia. And anyhow, so she was like, "I'm sending you for this test or this test." And she said the words, and again I blew it off. Well, in that period of time, we went and saw a different doctor, and he says, um we think that it's ataxia telangiectasia. So, like, we had a group of doctors who were working together, right? And so I
Mhm.
said, "Could you just write that down?" And, it was the
Yeah.
first time I had asked to hear it or to have it, and of course, um, I can't not look into stuff. I'm a
Yeah.
I have to, and so I went home and I actually
You're
looked
a
it up.
human.
Yeah, and I looked it up, and I mean, granted, it was a big mistake, but it also, like, the list of
Mm.
stuff that I was like, "This really sounds like him." But in that moment,
Mm.
I phoned our neurologist and I was like, "I need you to tell me what's wrong with my kid right now. Like, I can't. I'm not doing this. I'm not waiting forever." And she actually phones me the next day and she's like, "We'd like you to come in at like 8:30 in the morning." And Rob couldn't get out of work to come with me.
Mm.
And so I ended up going by myself. And that is the moment when I was like learning how to deal with those emotions on your own, right? It's like
Mm.
it's so much all at one time and you're like over processing it and trying to be calm, and then you're trying to be calm for your kid and you're trying to not, you know, and so yeah, like I can relate to that sort of like the scare of it and then like overthinking it and then thinking about the negative and all those things, and it's just, that
Mhm.
was probably the biggest one for me. And like even now, like, a lot of times I try to like not have my kids see that because it's just, it's my
Mhm.
own emotions, right? Like I don't need them to see me freaking out about stuff, right? But yeah, that was like the first time I think I had to like kind of learn how to like breathe it in and hold it in and like not get so worked up about it, even though like of course I got on the phone after like my kid was like sleeping in the car and we're driving, and then that's when I started phoning people, because I didn't want to,
Yeah.
like, I was freaking out. But, it's just, yeah. Like, I mean, I think
Yeah.
anxiety, depression, like all those kinds of things. Like, you kind of learn how to deal with them in different
Mhm.
ways, even though you deal with them all the time. Like, I think sometimes it's also circumstances, right? And how you deal with
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, it's so interesting how people sort of choose to manage, right? I know for years and years, people talk about getting a therapist or like that
Hmm.
was, but for a long time that was not looked at as a positive thing, right?
No.
It was like you deal with your shit or
Hmm.
you hide it or you know, worst case scenario, you go talk to your priest or pastor, but you
Uh-huh.
don't, you don't get therapy. So it's
No.
funny because like the our generation it was a little bit like that, but my kids generation they've normalized therapy, right? Whether
Oh,
they all
yes.
go to it or not, but their
Yeah.
friends, like it's just very it's almost more it's just the reason a lot of people don't do it or young people aren't doing it isn't because they don't agree with it or don't think they need it, it's because they can't afford it.
Oh,
It's
it's
very
so
expensive.
expensive. Yeah.
And if you don't have some sort of plan, which most young people and a lot of just regular people don't have plans, you can't do it. And I
No.
remember um, after my mom died was a really hard time for me. And I remember Trevor asking me, do you need to talk to somebody? And I was doing coaching. Like I kind of felt like I was pretty emotionally intelligent. I felt like I understood, but you don't understand yourself the way you could understand somebody else,
Yeah.
right? It's a sometimes a hard lesson to learn. We don't treat ourselves as gently or as kindly as we would other people. And I remember him saying, do you think you need to see somebody? And I just kind of said no, like I think I've self-diagnosed. I
Yeah.
feel like I know what I'm doing. And a little while later, I actually with something with my work, I had decided to talk to a therapist who was um, working with a group of coaches that I was working with. So she was kind of one of our colleagues, but she had a like a psych degree or whatever. And so I decided to talk to her about this work thing.
Hmm.
Well, that woman, just it was just the simplest thing. Like she was not getting in there and trying to figure things out. She was really going wherever I would lead or wanted to go. But it became so interesting that even just a simple shift in perspective from somebody else can
Hmm.
change and open up everything. And since then, I've gone to another therapist who I really loved, and she helped Trev and I really understand a new communication style
Mhm.
because of like the extreme thinking or not understanding sort of the middle ground or being too um kind of too all or nothing in certain situations. And it was just, we've been together since we were 12 years old. Like, yeah, we've established some patterns that might not
Uh-huh.
be as the most healthy or might not be the most effective. And so kind of having her talk us through a little bit of that and give us some alternative ways of communicating with each other was just fascinating actually for both
Mhm.
of us. We're like, we just didn't know, like, what a
Yeah.
great kind of new way to look at something. And since then, I know I'm hogging the mic, so I'm gonna let you jump in, but it sort of progressed to I have and will talk about this, and I it's a big part of what I've been going through is coming from our, grandparents, like, and coming from quite a religious background. All of us were raised pretty religious, and I've left organized religion, and still feel like there's a creator, feel like all that. I feel like I'm good that way, but I really started to realize that religion was more of a business, and
Yeah.
I wasn't aligned with that at all.
Mhm.
And so I've been on this like just learning about the sort of spirituality, different kinds of practices, just more out of curiosity, things like that. But I ended up talking to an indigenous therapist,
Mhm.
and she does a lot of her work through indigenous teachings, the Lakota teachings, which they're a plains tribe, and which is where my family is not Lakota, I don't think, but it's sort of in that area, the plains.
Okay.
And so some of the teachings are very similar to ones I've heard or learned. And when I started talking to her about um, different way of understanding dreaming, a different way of understanding deep rest, and of forgiveness of yourself, like, I think it's the thing about therapists is it's just a different way of looking at something.
Mhm.
I think we get very fixated on the way we have learned
Yeah.
and don't always realize that I would have never thought there was other ways to manage. I didn't know my thinking was extreme.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know it was actually, making me more anxious than it needed to, until someone pointed it out and just
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, I think there's another option that you haven't considered." And I'm like, "What? Wait a second. That actually works."